I saw Marcus, we were both presenting in a mastermind a few weeks ago in Mexico, and I was really impressed. And it takes a lot to impress me because I've been around the block once or twice. But Marcus was able to share with us an incredible array of information about the systems he uses to be as successful as he is. And he also talked to us about some of his sales secrets and strategies as well. So when I saw him, I learned from him and I took a ridiculous amount of notes. I said, I have to get Marcus on the podcast because it's not fair that I'm hoarding all of his wonderful wisdom to myself and my own brain. I need to share it, because sharing is one of the nicest and sweetest things you can do for other people. So there you go. I'm doing you all a favor with this. You're welcome. Anyway, Marcus, thank you so much for doing this, mate. Great to have you here and excited to chat with you on the podcast.
Hey, Owen, it's my absolute pleasure. You make me sound cooler than I really am. I'm merely a guy who's made a lot of freaking mistakes and have learned from some of the mistakes. So hopefully I can pass some of my learnings to you and your audience today.
I'm sure you can, mate. I'm sure you can. And so let's start off by, if you can give us just a rundown, a basic, brief introduction to yourself in terms of what you did, where you came from, and what you're doing now and who you currently help. If you can do that to get us going, that'd be super.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from a small town, Springfield, Oregon, which is a very, very small town. I'm actually the middle child of two Chinese immigrants. They came to America with absolutely nothing. And eventually, over time, we worked in a restaurant, growing up working really, really hard. Got older, graduated college. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Now, if you're watching this video, you'll see that I'm clearly Asian. So my parents wanted me to be a doctor, a lawyer, a surgeon, a captain, something more prestigious, which I did none of those things. Instead, I went to B2B sales because, frankly, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So when the B2B sales failed horribly, almost got fired, eventually figured it out, had some pretty good success, getting promoted 10 times in 10 years, won tons of awards, got to a point where I was running a big sales organization of over 110 plus employees, doing about 200 million a year plus in sales every single year. That was really cool, had a lot of fun doing that. And I did it for a while. In fact, my corporate career lasted about 14 years. And at that point, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And sometime during that time frame, I started to test out a side hustle that eventually became my main hustle. Got to the point where I decided to just retire completely from corporate America and go all into my side hustle, make it a main hustle. And that was actually a really fun yet scary time because I was deciding to bet on myself and not work for anybody else. I remember after the first couple of weeks, I'm like, this is incredible. And then I thought about quitting because I was like, this is really, really freaking hard. Now, fortunately didn't. I ended up sticking with it to this day. Now it's been over 3.5 years. We've run over 500 plus clients. I wrote a Wall Street Journal best-selling book. We have hundreds of case studies and success stories. It's been a really, really cool journey to go on. And I went from thinking I was running just a team by myself to a small team of 5. And now we have clients in literally most countries around the world. We have a lot of success stories, but more importantly, I freaking love what I do because ultimately I've learned that when you can learn how to sell effectively, you can change your life because everything in life is a sale. Ultimately, you are influencing someone else to part with time, money, resources. So the better you are doing that, the better your life can be.
So one of the things I forgot about you that I just remembered as I was listening to you is how fast you talk. You actually are one of the few people that talk faster than me. And you're one of the few people that when I listen to you on other podcasts, I don't multiply the speed by 2. A lot of the podcasts I listen to, I'm listening to it at multiplied by 2. I can't do that with you because it makes no sense, but I love it. So it reminds me of how valuable and how much value you're able to pack into a short amount of time. With that said, your story is obviously about how you built this empire, and I'm going to dig into some of the most important things that you did along the way. But before we get to that, when it comes to selling and when it comes to sales, obviously you're a well-known thought leader in this space. You're well regarded, and you've built up your business because of that respect that you get. Let me ask you, what is your general philosophy about effective selling? And I say that in the context of, what do you think some of the myths are that people have about the best way to sell? Or what do you think the things that most people forget in traditional selling courses? And what are the things that you really try to emphasize to your students?
Sure. So I'm going to start with the philosophy. I believe to master selling is to serve at the highest possible level. And I share that because if you have that type of philosophy and belief system in your mind, that means whatever you are choosing to ultimately sell, whether it's a product or service, you should truly believe in your heart that it's going to help the other person. And when you think this way, that impacts how you run your entire sales process. Because I think traditionally, a lot of people think that to be great at sales, you have to convince people. You have to talk a lot, and hopefully they'll end up buying. In some cases, they might buy. In fact, when I first got started in selling, that's exactly how I try to sell. But the tricky part was I usually felt pretty gross. I felt like I was trying to convince someone. I felt like I was trying to be a snake oil salesperson. It just didn't really feel good because really I wasn't serving them. I was actually selling out of my own self-interest, which was to not get fired or to hit a number or to make certain level of commission. And that's not a really good way to operate. But when you realize in sales, you're ultimately solving problems, what you're doing, you start approaching in a very different way. And the way I think about this is if you look at how a doctor approaches their patients, they basically run a sales process. But what they don't do is they don't have a patient come in and they ask one or two questions and they start to push like, hey, you need to have procedure A, you need to have this surgery, and start saying, here's benefit 1, benefit 2, benefit 3, benefit 4. They don't do that. Instead, what they do is they first diagnose you. They have a nurse come in, ask you a lot of questions. They might take certain measurements, have you take certain tests. Then they'll come in, the doctor, they'll ask you more questions and really diagnose deeply as much as they can. And only when they feel like they really know the root issue, the root problem, then they actually prescribe what they believe is the best solution. But they have so much conviction at that point because they know their goal is to help them, it is to serve them, it is to solve the problem. So that's how they effectively sell. And when a salesperson can really apply that, it's amazing what type of results they have. Because what happens is you then end up detaching from the outcome, meaning you're not so focused on trying to close someone or some fancy one-liner to close. You're focused on really seeking to understand them and really helping them come to a conclusion that what they need to do next is to invest into the solution to change their own life.
I love the way you put that, because I think what it comes down to, and the way I try to explain it, is a lot of people, the mistake they make is they start with the techniques. A lot of times they'll come up to me and say, oh, and I need you to tell me, give me one of your fancy techniques that helps people to change the way they're thinking so that they can believe in what it is that I want them to believe in. And I say, you're approaching it the wrong way. And it's never going to work that way, because ultimately speaking, your mindset needs to come before the techniques. People put technique before mindset. And I know you're big into mindset as well, Marcus. When we talk about mindset, we're really talking about the fact that as a salesperson, you're there, as you said, to make a difference. I love the example that you gave to do with a doctor. But what are some of the qualities that you, besides that mindset, right, which you could argue is one, what are some of the other qualities that you believe make up a great salesperson? What are the kinds of things that they can cultivate and the kinds of qualities that you try to build with your students whenever you're working with them?
So I think one of the big ones I see across the board for not just great salespeople, but just great people in general is the quality of curiosity. Because when you are genuinely curious, you actually will dive deeper and you'll ask more questions. And so instead of focus on trying to be interesting to a prospect, they focus on more being interested in them instead. So when you are having a conversation with a prospect, the average rep, when they hear some sort of pain, like the prospect says, oh, I'm having an issue with X. The average rep is like, great, I'm so excited to share with you my solution here. It's going to do X, Y, and Z. It's going to help you get rid of this issue. The elite salesperson said, that's really interesting. Can you tell me a little more about that? And they start going deeper and deeper. And they go into what I call level 10 questions because they're curious. So level 1's like a real surface level. They ask maybe one question. The level 10 question, they keep asking more and more and more and more and more. So they truly understand. And they're using a Socratic level type of question to go so deep. So now you understand the meaning of what they really mean. And that is definitely a key characteristic, that level of curiosity. I think what's also really important too is the top salespeople also have very strong AQ, adaptability quotient, meaning they're able to adapt to situations. So a lot of salespeople, they're like, hey, what's that one-liner? What's that magic question? What's the magic list of questions you can tell me? And they're hoping to follow the sequence and get the result. And you definitely want a framework to follow, but the framework is like an 8-lane freeway. It's all going the same direction, but your ability to adapt on the freeway changes how fast you go. So if you're on an 8-lane freeway, you're heading the same direction, but based off the prospect, based off what's in the road, based off the traffic patterns, you're going to adjust, slow down, speed up, change lanes to get to where you want to go. But you need the ability to adapt on the fly to be able to get there. And the only way you can do that is if you hit the right mind space and the right process in place. So you definitely need to be able to adapt for sure. You also need to be able to persevere, very important. So just like anything else in sales, good salesperson is going to close 30, 40%, meaning 60 to 70% of the time, they're going to get either a no or they're going to get a non-answer, something in status quo, some sort of maybe. So if you don't have perseverance, if you're not able to push through that, you'll focus on the 60 to 70% or maybe the 80% that don't move forward. And you'll end up getting in your own head. And I've always said to a lot of salespeople, the hardest territory to manage is always the one right between your ears. So if you know that to be true and you can actually persevere through, you're going to have long-term success across the board. I've also found on top of that, the most elite salespeople have a long-term horizon that they look at things. So average salespeople, they have a conversation with a prospect. It could actually be a really good prospect, but because a prospect is not saying, here's my credit card, let's go right now, they're like, good luck, see you later, I'm out, you're dead to me, which is a very selfish way to sell. If you have a long horizon that you look at things, it may not mean no forever, it might be no right now. So if you know that to be true, the really elite salesperson is just really cordial, professional, and they're not saying that person's dead to them. They're saying, hey, no worries, not a problem at all. And they're very cool with it, but then they'll nurture them long term. They'll keep that person in their pipeline, nurture them till they're ready to go. So the way I think about this is I always imagine that every prospect you talk to, if you got on a call with them, they're probably relatively qualified to some extent. Otherwise, you're wasting your time to initial call to begin with. If you know that to be true, it's like planting a seed in the garden. Some of them are going to come to fruition immediately. Some of them will just take time. But as long as you nurture that crop over time, once they're ready, they're going to come to you as well. So if you start thinking this way, you'll start closing a lot more deals. And I'll give you a really simple example. When I worked at one company, the average rep would close about one deal every other week. So about 2 deals a month. Now, I did a little better than that. I was closing between 3 to 4 deals each week to begin with. Now, on top of that, as I started building my pipeline up, I would meet with so many prospects that not all of them would 1 call close or 2 call close or 3 call close, but I would nurture them. So it got to the point, once I was about 6 to 8 months in, I started closing like 8 to 10 accounts every single week. So my level of production was literally 10x everyone else. Not because I was any better, but I had a longer time horizon. I was able to see those seeds that I was planting and wanted to nurture them a little bit later. So when you start thinking long-term time horizon, this is like any relationship. When you picture that type of game, you will do things to delay self-gratification. You'll do the hard things today that pay long-term dividends down the road. So there's a few qualities right there that I see top professionals have.
I think what I really like about these qualities are all of them are pretty much connected to mindset. So if you look first of all, the first set of questions and the 10 levels of questions, let's say, you're digging deeper and deeper to try to understand the psychology of the other person. But you're also, in doing so, leveraging more negative emotion by getting them to focus on the pain that they're experiencing if they don't get the solution. So instead of going straight in with the solution when they're not really prioritize that problem, you're asking those questions to be able to cultivate that. And that means your brain focused on how can I help them to not have this pain anymore. Then when we talk about, as you put it, AQ, so your ability to be able to adapt to any circumstance, that's really about you not going in with the technique or the formula, but you seeing it as something that you need to work on. Again, if you're paying attention and listening to your client, that means you are a lot more responsive. You're listening, as Stephen Covey would put it, first to understand and then to be understood, but you're always focusing on adapting it. And therefore, when you go into the interaction with that kind of mindset, that's obviously going to pay dividends. Then when it comes to perseverance and your ability to hear the no and still to bounce back, that's changing and completely transforming the way you think about rejection or the way you think about a stall or the way you think about an objection to the point that it doesn't hit the same way. So instead of you immediately internalizing and personalizing about you, you're now seeing it as this is just some information that I get that helps me to be better. And then most of all, the final one where you were talking about being more, as I would call it, more strategic, your ability to think in terms of longer term. That way of changing the way you think about the other person and the relationship you have and the conversations you have, and seeing the seeds example that you gave and seeing the long-term game, it completely and totally turns the entire interaction into something that you immediately can start to build on. And so it becomes more about the long game of results, but also about the skills that you cultivate. What I love about it is that all of them are very much related. It's not like you're saying that the quality is you need to be able to use this technique or use that technique. It's very much about what we're doing in here, as you pointed out, in terms of between the two ears. Love all of that. When people change their mind, Mark, for example, let's say you're selling and what you're selling, it requires you to overcome quite strong objections. I'm not talking about, oh, I'm not sure, blah, 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 but I'm talking about the tough objections you get. What are some of the most important things that you would suggest people do when they're trying to change someone else's mind, when they're trying to help them overcome a significant objection?
Great question. So, I find the wrong way most people do is they get an objection about whatever. Their instinct is like, okay, let me try to draw this one-liner. Let me start pushing harder and harder and harder. And as you and I know, the more that person starts pushing, the more the defenses go up. It's almost like the moat between them and the product gets wider and wider, and it gets deeper and deeper. And they become more and more resistant. It's like if your partner's upset with you and you're trying to convince them otherwise, it just gets worse. It doesn't get any better. So this is actually why I like to use a really, really simple framework that I call HEART. HEART. So first off, the H. They have to feel heard, right? So they have to feel heard that their objection has some sort of validity, because no one wants to be told you're wrong. That feels terrible. So even if just by making sure they feel heard, which might be as simple as, I totally appreciate that. Thank you so much for sharing your point of view. Let them diffuse attention by making them feel heard. That's the first piece. Next, we need to go into E, which is elaborate. That first layer of objection is almost like an onion, and there's a deeper rooted meaning inside there that could be aligned to that surface level objection, or it might be something completely different. So you want to get them to elaborate and talk about it more, because when they start talking about it more, this allows them to start processing through in their mind what's really the concern. So that might sound like, hey, can you tell me a little more about that? And again, notice my tonality may shift depending on how defensive they are. So I'm gonna have to soften my tone. I'm gonna insert some pausing, because ultimately my goal is I need to put them back into the psychological safety to have an open dialogue conversation with me. So it might be like, hey, can you tell me a little more about what you mean by this? And again, they're gonna start telling me, and I'm gonna dive as deep as I can. I want to get down to the very root of what the objection is. And once I get to that point, once I'm crystal clear on exactly what the real root cause of the objection is, I'm going to use A, which is, aside from that objection, is there anything else? I want to isolate out, aside from big core objection, is there anything else on their mind? And sometimes you'll see they may think there is, so you have to say something like, hey, so aside from concern X, is there anything else that's holding you back from being less than 100% certain this is the best solution for you? So now what happens is, no, there's not. I think that's pretty much it. Well, are you sure? I want to make sure I really understand your situation. No, that's it. Got it. So now, if you've done a good job, the first part's HEA, they should be like, okay, Marcus gets me. He gets my concern. He's not trying to shove something down my throat. And by the way, that first 3 letters might take like 5-10 minutes, potentially, depending on the complexity of how they're processing through whatever's on their mind. So now I'm gonna do a reframe. So now I'm going to go to R, which is I'm gonna re-clarify what they actually like about the solution. So there's probably something about the solution they actually like. So I want to shift their mind from that negative to a positive, like you mentioned before. So they might sound something like, hey, so this makes perfect sense. I'm so glad you shared that with me. So let's put that aside for just a second. Remind me again, what did you like most about what we discussed so far today? And now you're starting to shift them back. Marcus, I like X, I like Y, I like Z. Cool. And how will that help you? Well, help me this way. And how will that impact you? And what's really interesting is when you do this, sometimes that initial objection disappears completely, because now they realize it's actually really inconsequential in comparison to all the things that they personally have just admitted to you. Now, sometimes you're going to be like, I love all this thing, but I'm still concerned about X thing. No problem. Then you go to T, you transition to overcome it. And at that point, now you will just, based off if you've done a good job on the discovery part of the process, you'll bring back things to show them why it's no longer a concern. And that could really vary depending on how well you did the discovery part to be able to eliminate that. For some people, they might be, like who want to look at my coaching program, their concern might be like, well, maybe I'll just try to read some more books, and hopefully my results turn around. Part of our sales process is we actually uncover all the prior solutions, how long they've tried it for, and why it doesn't work anymore. So then we'll actually bring them back. So you mentioned earlier that you've already tried it before. And how long did you try that for again? Well, 6 months. And what type of results did you get? not very good results. So if you haven't got results for 6 months, if you continue to do the same thing, do you think you'll get different results? And now we just allow them to kind of come to their own conclusion on, yeah, that's kind of stupid actually. So there's no true convincing or I'm trying to persuade them. I'm merely asking questions that allow them to come to their own conclusion that this is the best solution for them.
And so in many ways, they're changing their own mind.
Correct.
You're asking the questions, and as I like to put it, you're creating the conditions
Correct.
whereby they change their mind. So that's wonderful stuff. One of the other things that you do so well, and again, this is what was so impressive about you, Marcus, was your ability to you systematize everything, right? Even when it comes to the way you think. We shared some stories about wedding proposals and all sorts of stuff over dinner, which was such a fun conversation. But what I learned a lot, like there was a pattern there, and the pattern is that you stack the deck in your favor. You're thinking of everything, right? You're playing every piece to maximize the light, and not in a like Machiavellian way, right? Not in a way that impacts anybody else, but in a way that optimizes the likelihood of people sort of saying yes. And just to avoid going around in circles, the systems that you use is demonstrative of how diligently you think through all the possible steps and ramifications. So I see when you talk about your systems, it's not just a set of steps that you take on a regular basis. It's also really well thought out. Could you talk to us about the importance of systems for you, and what are the kind of considerations that go into your mind whenever you build a system in your life? And I know that you've systems for absolutely everything. So we'd love to hear some of the things that you think are most important when considering systems in your life.
Great question. It's one of those things where I never used to consider myself like a systems thinker. It was more so that I would run into a problem and I'll think to myself, like, that's a really annoying problem. Why do I keep running into this? How can I not have this issue? That's what it breaks down to, right? It's like, this problem keeps popping up in my life. How do I get rid of this problem? So I'll give you a simple example to start off with. So I was a competitive swimmer growing up. And one of the hardest things to do in the morning is to wake up early, change, get in your car, and drive down to the pool, jump in a freezing cold pool outside at 5:30 in the morning. It's just really, really not enjoyable. And there was a lot of friction points to even get to that point. So for me, number one, I got to get all my stuff, change in my house, and then I grab my water bottle, fill it with water, like grab a snack, put it in my bag. It'd be all these things that would require like a lot of work in the morning just to like get out the door to get to the pool. So there's a lot of friction already. And I realized first you just do this, you don't really think much about it. So I was just doing it, and I was doing like, I feel like I'm just like wasting a lot of time in the morning because now I have to wake up actually earlier to do that. And I started asking myself questions like, well, how could I be more efficient? How can I be more effective? How can I cut down my time, actually have more time to sleep? I'm like, well, what if I just packed my bag the night before? Okay, that's easy. What if I just had my ice water in the fridge already? What if my snack was already in my bag? What if I just had like literally my Speedo next to my bed? So literally I roll out of bed, I put it on, put in my clothes, and just walk out and grab myself and leave. I'm like, what if I did that? So I started doing that. And that simple system naturally saved me an extra 30 minutes in the morning. Because when you start thinking this way, you start realizing whenever there's a common problem in your life, you can start to systemize out. Whatever is consistent as an issue, you can start to remove. So I think when I was running really big sales teams, and the process, you bring someone in and they would give us a 90-day training playbook to kind of put the reps through. And we wouldn't allow them to actually start doing anything that's really sales related, like making cold calls, getting in the field till week 7 or 8. And then they would do that. Now, the issue was this. I knew it would take them at least 4 to 6 weeks, somewhat comfortable. So now what that meant was from the time they get hired to the time they actually start getting any type of result, it's literally about 90 days to get like okay results. And what would happen would be, I also observed that their confidence level would start going down. Because at that point, they basically have gone 3 months without really any results. And they're a top performer, they're like mentally destroying themselves. I started noticing that a higher attrition period within the first 12 months. I'm like, interesting. Because they weren't seeing progress. And progress is the ultimate motivation. But this is my issue. This is my constraint. So how can I change the system? Again, these are rules made up by the corporate, created by somebody else. Why can't I break those rules and create a better system? So what did I do? Super simple. all I did was I just started changing how I restructured the training. I got them in the field by literally week 1. So instead of waiting 6 weeks, I started getting in the field early on, and I changed the order of the training by doing the way I wanted to do it. And I involved more hands-on training up front. And lo and behold, what would happen? By week 3 or 4, they're already closing deals. So the confidence starts skyrocketing, especially when they compare it to other training classes of other reps around the region. They will be already performing, or they're already like basically like 9 weeks ahead of everyone else at that point. So the systems that I created ultimately are always based off a problem I ran into. And when you start realizing your life is full of problems, in fact, you will always have problems. Like, you'll never not have problems. That's life. The only time you don't have problems, like Tony Robbins says, is when you're no longer here. It's just that at every new level, there's a new devil. There's new problems you run into. So with that being said, for myself, when I started my business, I would start to build systems. I ran into a problem like, ooh, this is an issue. Let me build a better system for that. For example, even like content management. So when I first started doing content, it was just me. I didn't have anybody to work for me. So it was really easy. I could have a Google sheet. I was only posting on LinkedIn, only one type of content. So I could just have literally easy columns. Here's a date. Here's the topic. Here's the post I'm gonna write about. That was it, super easy. And then over time, I started bringing people in, had different types of content, from videos, carousel, text, screenshots, whatever, and it started varying. Also, the themes started varying. And then it became more complex where I would have different marketing strategies. So I had to start planning in advance. Because of these problems, I'm like, geez, this Google Sheet is not gonna be good enough. So I had to find a better solution. And then I built a better system. And with each iteration, it gets more complex, but also easier to implement. So what I realized is if you have a system to do whatever you want to do, it starts to eliminate your problems and increase your likelihood for success. So that's why I'm a little obsessive about systems, because when you do it right, you can apply systems for everything in your life. And for some people who are like, I don't think I need systems for anything, the reality is if you don't have a system, that's your system. If you have a problem that constantly pops up, that's your system of dealing with it. But if you realize you can engineer out a lot of things, why wouldn't you? That's my question.
Love it. When you talked about the swimming, that reminded me about 23 years ago, I did my one and only marathon, at least so far. And I had to run, obviously, the few months up to it. And I didn't like running. I didn't like getting up in the morning. I didn't like the cold. So it was just waking up at 6 a.m. or 5:30 a.m. or whatever to go out for a run for an hour was literally the worst thing that I could possibly imagine. And so what I did was I put my t-shirt next to the bed, put a pair of shorts and pair of runners and socks. But from the time that I woke up to the time that I was actually out the door was sometimes as little as 40 seconds. That's how quick I did it. I didn't even visit the toilet or restaurant. I went straight out the door. And it just meant that it was easier for me. Also, when you talk about you always have problems, there's something I always try to let people know is that life is, as you said, always full of problems, but it's about upgrading your problems. That's it. One of my favorite quotes to paraphrase is Rilke, when he said, the purpose of life is to be defeated by greater and greater things. That's it. I just love that because I think that our human nature is constantly striving to deal with more challenges. If things get too easy, if we're too complacent, well, we don't have as much dopamine and we can't. Again, I might actually ask you to come back at some point in the future to talk to us more deeply about systems, just because the way you time box everything and book everything is insane. I mean, I always thought I was over the top, and then I saw you, I'm like, well, okay, there's over the top and then there's over the top. But over the top, as Zig Ziglar would say, I'll see you at the top.
I appreciate that.
So just to get into the final round, so I just want to ask you a number of quick fire questions.
Sure.
Once we do that, then I want to ask you about how people can learn more about what you do and whatnot. But first of all, favorite movie?
So favorite movie, probably The Dark Knight. It's the storyline. I mean, amazing.
I get it.
Yeah.
What an antagonist as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Favorite author?
Let's see. Well, favorite author, aside from obviously you and myself.
Of course.
You know, it's interesting. I go through phases, different things. I don't know if I have a favorite author necessarily, but I have like favorite books. So I'll say my favorite book that fits well. It's Vishen Lakhiani, The Code of the Extraordinary Mind.
Excellent. Love it. Brilliant. Artist, favorite artist, like painter, whatnot, or sculptor or something? Have you got one?
So, I don't know if you consider him an artist, you're going to laugh, but Justin Timberlake, because this guy, like being able to like sing, dance, act, and have a multitude of just kind of things is wildly impressive to me. Anyone who can display an art form in so many ways and do it really well, I'm always impressed by.
Yeah, no, it counts. Well, the next one was favorite musician or band. So,
So let's take a look. I mean, I'm so lame. I don't even listen to like any new stuff anymore. Let me take a look. So it's one of the things where whenever I pull up an old, I don't want to say CD because that makes it sound older than it really is, or 8-track or anything like that. I would say when I pull my Spotify up, whenever I go back and listen to anything from Usher, just I'm cool and gangster like that. It takes me back to the time where it was just a little more innocent, if you will.
sure. Yeah, no, that's good. Favorite philosopher?
I don't think he's considered a philosopher, but I like how he philosophize, if that's a word. Naval Ravikant.
Oh, very good. Excellent.
Yeah.
Great. The Almanac is a wonderful book.
Yes, exactly.
Favorite TV series?
Probably The Office. It's easy. It makes you laugh every time.
Oh, phenomenal. Desired superpower?
Control time.
Very cool. Speaking of control time, if you could travel anywhere in time, past, present, or future, where would you go?
It's interesting. Well, this will show how capitalistic I am. The future.
Yeah, the Sports Almanac, right?
Yeah. The Sports Almanac. It's the Michael J. Fox. Yeah, the future.
Very good. As long as you can come back to the past and then put some.
Exactly.
I would expect nothing else from you with your strategic mind.
Yeah.
If you could live anywhere else besides where you live, where do you think you'd settle?
Wherever really makes my wife happy, and I'm surrounded by really cool, interesting people. I mean, so I'm pretty chill and easy going. I can pretty much adapt to anywhere, but I think who I'm with is the most important.
I love that answer. That's excellent. If you weren't doing what you're doing, what would you be doing?
Well, since I have the choice to do what I do, it's kind of hard to answer because I basically get to do whatever I want to do. I mean, I think ultimately I would just spend time not philosophizing, if that's even a word, but just like consuming and learning and trying new things. Because I love the deep production creative mode. And as you build a business, you end up becoming also an operator as well. And I've done my best to try to remove myself from the operational parts. So I would say to be probably in this position where I basically don't do anything at all except just hang out with cool people, learn new things, try new things, and just have fun doing that.
You're speaking my language, brother. That's the dream. And last but not least, one piece of advice for the world. If you could put it on a billboard, what would one bit of advice?
Only take advice from people who have achieved what you want to achieve at a massive level consistently. A lot of people, especially in today's time, are false gurus, put a lot of information out there. Doesn't necessarily mean they've actually had results. So just be very, very careful who you take internalized advice from.
So make sure they don't have PhDs in ChatGPT only.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant. Marcus, this has been wonderful. Really, really enjoyed chatting with you as always. Could you let people know, how do they find out more about you? How can they get your book? Let us know.
Awesome. So you can get my book. It's free, pay for shipping and handling. Go to venly.co/book. You can find me on any of the platforms. So LinkedIn is my most popular one. Look me up on YouTube channel as well. Look me up on there. A lot of free resources there. But it's been a pleasure being on today's podcast.
Thank you so much, mate. Look forward to the next time.
Thanks so much.